There is a famous article from CNN about an American woman who moved to Spain and completely regretted it, so she moved back to the US. And the truth is, Spain is not for everyone. Some people will struggle living in Spain. I know this because I own a relocation company and I've talked to hundreds of people who dream of living here. And I've noticed that there are some people who should not move to Spain because they just won't be happy here based on what they're looking for. As this woman said in the article, if I would have known all these things beforehand, I would have never moved to Spain. So, to help you avoid making the same mistake, I'm going to cover the biggest complaints she mentioned in the article, along with my honest opinion on each of them. Let's go. First, let's start with the weather. After moving to Galicia, which is in the north part of Spain, she complained that she hated the weather, especially how cold it gets in the winter. Because Spain is in southern Europe and rarely gets snow, a lot of people assume it's warm year-round, but that's just not true. Spain can get quite cold in the winter, and northern Spain especially gets very rainy, windy, and cold from its proximity to the Atlantic Ocean. On the other hand, more inland cities such as Madrid, Granada, or Sevilla get scorching hot in the summertime with a dry heat that can reach over 40 degrees Celsius or over 104 degrees Fahrenheit. And cities on the Mediterranean coast, such as Valencia, Barcelona, and Malaga, get very humid during the summer to the point that you'll be dripping in sweat if you're not constantly under air conditioning. And despite being on the Mediterranean, which is much warmer than the Atlantic, it still gets cold in the winter, especially in older buildings that aren't well insulated and don't have heating. When I studied here in 2017 and I lived in an old Spanish style apartment that I wasn't prepared for, there was no window in my room, no AC during the hot and humid summertime, and it got freezing cold in the winter since there was no heating, so I was wearing a sweater and 3 blankets when going to bed. So if you're moving to a hot area, air conditioning is a must, and if you are heading to a colder part of Spain, a reliable heating system is just as important. Make sure you're okay with the climate before choosing a city in Spain. Another thing this lady mentioned was that local social circles are hard to break into. She said in the article they talk to you, but it's not like, oh, come over to my house and have some drinks. There is some truth in that, although this is true in many European countries, and overall I'd say that Spanish people in general are actually much more open than most other parts of Europe. I think this lady was mostly talking about northern Spaniards. They are indeed more reserved in Basque and Galicia, however, very warm and welcoming in the south and southeast. Keep in mind that if you move to a city that doesn't have a big expat community, such as in smaller towns, you will generally find it harder to build a social circle. My husband and I have lived in several countries and have generally found it easier to befriend other expats because there is no language barrier and you have more in common. It's not that locals don't want to befriend you, it's just that they already have their tight-knit social circles and aren't actively going out and looking to make new friends outside of their local network. While expats tend to be actively looking to meet people when they move to a new country. That being said, I don't recommend just isolating yourself in an English-speaking expat bubble either. It's super important to learn Spanish if you plan on living here, and knowing the language makes it much easier to talk to the locals and integrate here. Even if you don't speak great Spanish, they're super patient and understanding, and they appreciate you making the effort. Okay, this next one is a very interesting point: sales tax. She says in the article, people think that it's cheaper, but you really need to do the math and take into consideration the higher sales tax, because at the end of the day, it may not be that cheap. In Europe, sales tax is called VAT, which stands for value added tax. And yes, you pay VAT on most goods and services. In Spain, the standard VAT rate is 21%, which applies to most things, electronics, clothing, restaurants, services. There are reduced VAT rates for essentials, 10% for things like restaurant meals, hotel stays, and some transportation, 4% for basics like milk, bread, some medications, and some things are even exempt from VAT, like certain education services and public healthcare. But here is why I completely disagree with what she said about it not being cheaper. Even with taxes taken into account, the cost of living in Spain is much lower than in the US. For example, according to Numbeo, the overall cost of living, including rent in Valencia, is 45% lower than in Miami. Grocery prices are 39% lower, and rent prices are almost 60% lower. So in this case, even with paying somewhat higher taxes in Spain, the lower cost of living makes up for it and even more. So I can't agree with her on this one, and I think she downplayed the lower cost of living. The truth is that your money still goes much further in Spain than it does in the US, even with the higher taxes taken into account. If you want proof of this, I have a client who is also moving from Florida to Valencia, who recently sent me a photo of the price of coffee in the US, and it was over $16. And I looked for the same coffee here and the same exact same coffee and the exact same amount. It was 5.5 euros, a little over $6. So that's over 2.5 times more expensive in the US for the exact same product. I could give you plenty other examples, but you get the point. The biggest price difference you'll notice when it comes to taxes is on electronics, since the base price of electronics isn't lower in Spain like it is for other goods, and you'll have to pay VAT on top of it. So that's why if you're moving to Spain, I recommend buying your electronics in the US first, since you aren't taxed on personal items you already own when immigrating to Europe. But aside from rare exceptions like electronics, most things are significantly cheaper in Spain. Look, I get that the idea of taxes intimidates a lot of Americans, but this is something my husband and I carefully calculated before moving to Spain. And even with all taxes taken into account, both sales tax and income tax, your money still goes a lot further here than it does in the US, since the overall cost of living is so much lower. The other thing she mentioned was the difficult schedule in Spain. In the article, she said all of their businesses and restaurants, for the most part, close at 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Banks close at 2, and then you can't do anything. There is no services being provided. Yeah, this is true. Keep in mind it's mostly banks, pharmacies, and local small businesses that close during siesta time. Supermarkets like Mercadona, chain stores like Zara, and malls like El Corte Inglés are typically open all day. She also said you can't go eat because they close at 4 and then they don't open again until 8, 9 o'clock at night. I don't know any of restaurants that open at 9 p.m. I think that's an exaggeration, but most local places do open at 8 p.m. There is a workaround though. Most international restaurants, such as Italian trattorias, they stay open all day. So my husband and I often go there if we want to eat out before 8 p.m. But I can see why getting used to the US schedule would be difficult for Americans. In the US, everything is open 24/7 and most Americans eat dinner early. Here in Spain, you've got to adjust to the schedule. Personally, we struggle having dinner at 6, 7 p.m. Usually it's 9 or even 10 p.m. So this is the reality. But ultimately, you're in control of your schedule, and we know several families here that still wake up early, eat dinner, and go to sleep early despite Spain's later schedule. Okay, now for the most controversial part of the article, food. In the article, she mentioned that the food was fried, greasy, and unhealthy. This last is very funny to me, as it's ironic for an American saying that another country has greasy and unhealthy fried food, coming from the country with the most fried food of all. She also mentioned they eat a ton of seafood, saying, "I'm done with the seafood. It's like seafood for everything." To address her points, yes, there is some fried food here, such as fried calamari, croquetas, and so on. I wouldn't say it's that much though. There are plenty of non-fried options. As for seafood, yes, they do eat plenty of seafood in Spain. It's part of the Mediterranean diet, so there are lots of different seafood options. I personally love this because I enjoy seafood and it's very healthy. However, I can understand for someone who doesn't like seafood that they could get tired of it here. And you also can't generalize the food for the entire country, as each region has different cuisines. There is a huge diversity of food here in Spain, and there is so much variety that you can eat however you want. Whether you're vegan, keto, or anything else, you will find places that will cater to your needs. The one exception though is that if you move to a small town like she did, then yes, you will obviously have fewer options. I doubt she would have had the same opinion about the food if she had moved to Valencia instead. Plus, as I've mentioned many times before in previous videos, the produce is some of the best and freshest produce in the world. And since Spain is so international, there are countless options for international cuisine. So I'm a huge fan of the food in Spain, and I think for most people it will be a huge improvement from the food you're used to eating, especially if you're used to processed food in the US or even in the UK. Another thing she mentioned in the article is that the country has a big problem with squatters. She said if you buy a property over there, you run the risk of it being occupied. This is somewhat true. There are problems with squatters in Spain, although they aren't typically people who just randomly occupy an empty house. Rather, they're people who start renting and then stop making rent payments, and landlords aren't able to evict them. So the biggest impact this has on most expats isn't the risk of buying a house and having a squatter move into it illegally. Rather, it's when you're renting, landlords are skeptical about renting their apartments to people, especially with a long-term contract, as it means they can't evict people if they stop paying. This has made it harder to find a long-term rental here in Spain, since landlords don't trust people in the beginning. One solution to this is to start with a short-term rental and build trust with landlords, and then once you have a relationship with them, you can often negotiate to turn it into a long-term contract. This is exactly what we did. We changed our short-term rental contract to a long-term one. So in conclusion, I think the biggest mistake this lady made was moving to a smaller town in northern Spain rather than moving to a bigger, more international and warmer city like Valencia, Malaga, Madrid, or Barcelona. To be fair, I'm not criticizing this lady at all. I respect that she made the move and tried to make it work and then decided that it simply wasn't for her. But the most telling quote in the entire article is when she says, "We didn't have good information, and if we would have known all these things beforehand, I would have never moved to Spain." This is exactly why I try to be objective in my videos, to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly of living in Spain. Her frustration didn't come from Spain being bad. It came from unrealistic expectations, a lack of research, and choosing a region that didn't align with what she was really looking for. And this is actually the first time I've heard someone say they were unhappy with moving to Spain. You can find literally dozens of articles from people saying it was one of the best decisions they ever made. So if you're serious about moving to Spain in the next 3 to 6 months and want professional help with the entire process, you can book a call with me and my team. We help with securing your visa, choosing the right city for your lifestyle, finding an apartment, enrolling your kids in school, navigating taxes, and everything else you need for a successful move. The link to book a call is in the description below, or you can scan the QR code on your screen right now. And if you want to learn more about the best visa options for your move to Spain, you can download my digital nomad visa checklist and non-lucrative visa checklist. The links are also in the description. Thanks for watching, and if you're wondering what to watch next, you can click here to check out this other video I did on what Americans get wrong about moving to Spain. And I'll see you next week. Hasta pronto!